a scene together, how you might work with Shakespeare. So the big thing with comedies is that in terms of Shakespeare, you're talking about a massive amount of plays. And they basically fall into three sections. You've got the opening plays, the early plays, which are the early comedies, things like Taming of the Shrew, the Comedy of Errors, Two Gentlemen of Verona. Then you've got the great comedies, which mature in the middle. And then towards the end of his life, he writes the late comedies, the last plays, The Tempest, Cymbeline, Winter's Tale. Now, we can't really deal with all of them because that's a huge subject. So the idea with this one is I want to home in on the four central ones: Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, As You Like It, and Much Ado About Nothing, which are the four plays that probably are done most of all, are the most well known. They're also quite often plays that they're hard to understand. They're not as direct as the tragedies. When you look at the tragedies, they're always there. The power of the tragedies is there. You're always going to be moved by them. You're always going to be made to think about them. You're always going to be able to write essays on the philosophy of the tragedies. But the comedies are much more subtle. And for a lot of people who don't actually like Shakespearean comedy, there's a wonderful man I used to know in a theatre called Michael Mayer, who is a translator of Strindberg and Ibsen. I used to know him very well. And he hated Shakespearean comedy. He didn't see the point. And part of the point here is what I want to do with this particular workshop is trying to address that thing of why do some people find the comedy so difficult. So I said in my the original blurb of the whole thing that some of the big questions about Shakespearean comedies is, are they meant to be funny? An awful lot of people don't find them funny. They're hard to make funny on stage. Sometimes partly because the language is dated, sometimes partly because the wordplay doesn't mean the same thing, partly because some of the things that the plays are making fun of don't really mean anything to us anymore. So a play like Love's Labour's Lost, which is full of brilliant verbal jokes about the academia and mental goings on at the time, don't really mean a huge amount to us now. So that's one thing. And it's how you make those things funny. And the big thing I was going to want to say about comedy, Shakespearean comedy in particular, and this is what I think people forget with Shakespearean comedy, it's often done in productions as a kind of stopgap for the tragedies. People think the tragedies are the real pinnacle. They're the ones that you want to climb. They're the ones that you want to show that you're a great actor. They're the ones you want to show you're a great director because of the massive emotions of them. And comedies are often, well, you do the comedy. We'll do the comedy to please the audience. We'll have some fart gags in Midsummer Night's Dream. We'll have some giggles in, with Toby Belch. But what people miss about the comedies is that essentially they're transformative. They have a transformative power. And this goes back to, this starts right at the beginning of how you need to understand Shakespeare. And one of the things I was thinking about as I was preparing this, and I hadn't really thought about this before, that Shakespeare was the first playwright to write plays in which whole communities were transformed by the action of the play. In Greek tragedy, you have the incredible kind of focus of the tragic characters and their trajectory of kind of disaster. But the thing that's extraordinary about Shakespearean comedy is that he creates whole communities of characters, all of which are vivid, all of which are alive, all of which are like different ingredients to a different meal. And into this community of characters, he usually puts his main character. And through that process, everybody is changed. And if you look at the four plays that we're talking about, Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, As You Like It, What to Do About Nothing, they all exist in fantasy worlds which are different to where the characters start. So in Midsummer Night's Dream, it's a magical forest. The lovers find themselves they leave the real world, they go into a magical forest, they encounter fairies and monsters. Everybody is changed. You don't know whether things are real or whether they're not. And then when they come out, they're different. In Twelfth Night, you're transported to Illyria, a country which doesn't even exist. It's only a region. And there's no doubt Shakespeare knew nothing about it. And the Illyria he creates is this weird dreamlike area of the mind. It's got nothing to do with the geographical place. I once saw a production where they set it in the literal Illyria, and it was incredibly boring. And there's something about Twelfth Night, which is this magical land where Viola goes and finds herself. And As You Like It's the same thing. They're exiled from the court. They find themselves in the Forest of Arden, where they're sort of on a weird holiday. Although it's a kind of exile from the court, they find themselves in this forest where all these magical things happen. They meet these unusual people. And there's this strange chemistry between all the characters that changes everything. And in Much Ado About Nothing, it's the army coming back from the war, and they're going to get their children married off with another family, etc., etc. And that's the pattern of Shakespearean comedy. And if the pattern of that is essentially, it's mythic. if you look at them all again, you see within the stories, we talked a little bit about in Greek tragedy, all the kind of gods and everything. In in Shakespearean comedy, you've got all sorts of mythic tropes about deaths and rebirths and, strange processes whereby characters are not who they are. So you have, in Much Ado About Nothing, hero apparently dies and is resurrected. In Twelfth Night, both the twins, Sebastian and Viola, are apparently dead and come back to life in some sense and reveal themselves. In As You Like It, the whole kingdom is thrown out, and through a really mysterious process in the countryside, everybody's transformed and reformed, and everything is healed. All these different places, and they all end with a marriage. That's the other big thing. Every Shakespearean comedy ends with a marriage, or some kind of marriage, or even several marriages, and that's the pattern again. What I didn't talk about when we were doing Greek tragedy is that the word tragedy comes from the Greek word the song of the goat. Interesting. The reason for that is that you've all heard of the term of the scapegoat, the sacrifice of the goat. Basically, the ancient cities, every year there was a ritual where an animal was either sacrificed or exiled, usually a goat, and that goat carried the sins of the community, so they purified the community. So that's Oedipus being exiled. You know what I mean? These different characters were the character who took the sins of the community away. Those are the mythic structures. In Shakespearean comedy, it's fertility rites again. It's marriage, it's love, it's sexuality, and at the end of them all, there's a celebration of marriage. So in Midsummer Night's Dream, you've got the wonderful celebration of the marriage with the comedy performance by the Mechanicals, etc., etc. In Much Ado About Nothing, they're all going to get married, etc., etc. And the whole essence of that is that they were all, in those days, there were still a lot of pagan processes where you still celebrate. I remember the thing that dropped this for me, I was in Hungary once and I saw this wonderful folk dance, which was essentially about a celebration of the earth, but also people coming together and being married. So the patterns of Shakespearean comedy continue to be mythic, and they continue to allow these processes of transformation to happen. And I'll talk about that when we actually get onto the scenes. Does any of this make sense? Am I going too fast? Am I talking gibberish? No, excellent. That's good news because I think I'm talking gibberish. So if I'm not, that's great. Maybe I should be a politician. So where was I? Yeah. Now, the other thing is, I remember when I was at university, when you talk about these mythic patterns, there was a tutor of mine who quoted a very, very famous critic saying the amazing thing about Shakespeare is he seems to know about archetypes and gods and fertility rites. How could this be? And the simple reason was that when Shakespeare was alive, all of these things were still going on in the UK. That although it was nominally a Christian society, all the folk traditions around the land were still going on. And a key one, which was an ancient pagan rite, which was all across Europe, was this kind of celebration in spring, where the whole community went into a forest. You're going to find this amazing. And they all had group sex. So everyone had sex, ran around. So it's a massive orgiastic kind of cult. And the idea was that this boosted the birth rate. You didn't have to have sex with your husband or your wife. It just was this massive, great random celebration. And it still carried on, weirdly enough, in parts of Spain into the time of Lorca. And in fact, when he writes Yerma, there's a festival of that kind. And these rites weren't banned in the UK until Oliver Cromwell. So when you're looking at a play like The Midsummer Night's Dream, where everybody goes into the forest and no one knows what's going on, and one of them is turned into a donkey, that's what he's drawing on. Do you see what I mean? He's drawing on all these pagan rites that were going on. And at the end of As You Like It, when the figure comes in, goddess Hymen comes in to celebrate marriage, again, it's like the Harvest Queen, all those different things. So those are the key things I'm going to say. The other thing I'm going to say is that what we're also going to look at with this is the other thing about comedies. The definition of a comedy in those days was not necessarily something that made you laugh, but something that had a happy ending. So in other words, if it wasn't a tragedy, if things were resolved, characters survived, and they ended with a marriage, that was a comedy. That's why something like the Divine Comedy, which deals with hell, purgatory, and heaven, is called the comedy. The idea is if it works out, then it's a comedy. There was laughter along the way, and that's obviously a key part of the whole thing. But the whole point of Shakespeare's comedies is to tell stories which end in a joyous place. That said, as we'll also see, there's always a darkness in Shakespearean comedy. There's always someone who's excluded from the happy ending, or rejects it, or walks away from it, or criticizes it. So there's always a shadow in his plays. The other thing we're going to look at is the fact that because of the subtlety of comedy, Shakespearean comedy, the language actually becomes almost more important to get right than the tragedies. That you have to be so observant of the rhythms and the delight of it. And the other thing I'm going to point out is that the comedies also deal with enchantment. And part of the purpose of watching a comedy is to completely intoxicate you with the joy and the kind of delight of what's going on with the different characters. And because each play is really about love, that's where the intoxication comes. So I've rambled on a little bit too much. I was supposed to begin with a speech from A Midsummer Night's Dream, which captures some of the things I'm talking about. So Robin is going to give us this speech. It's a famous speech that comes at the end of the play, those from the king Theseus. Now, those of you who don't know, Mark, for instance, if you don't know the story of Midsummer Night's Dream, it's about four lovers, all of whom are in different combinations of obsession with each other, who, because two of them are told that if they marry each other, they will be executed, flee into a forest to get away, and are chased by two other lovers who want to get them back. And at the end of the story, Theseus, who's the king of the kingdom, the lovers come back, everything's been worked out, but they tell this weird story of fairies, Titania, Oberon, the character who turns into a donkey. And this is the speech that Theseus gives after he's heard their story. Off you go, Robin.
Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold, that is the madman. The lover, all as frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Such tricks hath strong imagination that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. Or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear?
Good. Thank you, Robin. Very nice. Okay, so a round of muted applause there. Okay, brilliant. So, any comments about that speech? It's a beautiful speech. Anyone want to say anything about it? No? Okay. Well, the reason I chose that speech to begin is that the whole thing is that sets the scene for the entire comic world. That love makes you mad. That love and sexuality can turn the most sober and sane and well-to-do together person into a fool. And madness and love are very close, but at the same time, madness, love, and poetry, in other words, the ability to suddenly feel powerfully and express it beautifully, are all somehow linked. And all of these things are what happened in the plays. Just a couple of things about the language in Shakespeare's plays, just a general tip. If someone is speaking in verse, it's usually because they are either a heroic figure or an aristocratic figure or one of the more dynamic figures in the play, a Theseus or those different characters. What's interesting in Shakespeare is that every now and then, if a character is speaking in verse, then you know that there's a significance to that character that you need to look at. So for instance, Shylock in Merchant of Venice is given verse, and Caliban is given verse in The Tempest. Characters who are supposed to be villains are given a kind of power and a status through the verse that means they're moving into more kind of elevated ways of thinking. Prose can also have powerful things to say, but in Shakespeare, prose has a different dance, particularly in the comedies, and that's something else we're going to be looking at. Because poetry, there's one of the big themes about Shakespearean drama is how you woo. and how when characters woo with prose and when they woo with verse is very different. We'll see that as it unfolds. So the big theme that he's bringing up is love, and all of these plays are really exploring love and the problems that that involves. And the big tension with all of them is the fact that we all want to find the lover who we're going to be with for all our life. We all have the romantic ideal that there is somebody and that you're going to be with them and you're going to be happy for the rest of your life. You get that in Shakespeare as much as anybody else. The problem is human nature isn't as simple as that, and all sorts of things are going to go wrong on the way. So one of the big things that Shakespeare deals with is the famous line, "The path of true love never did run smooth." So all these comedies are about people's struggle to find love. And the ultimate goal is to find marriage. And Robin, if you can give us, there's a speech in Twelfth Night where a character describes what marriage is supposed to be.
A contract of eternal bond of love, confirmed by mutual joinder of your hands, attested by the holy close of lips, strengthened by interchangement of your rings, and all the ceremony of this compact sealed in my function by my testimony. Since when my watch hath told me towards my grave I have travelled but 2 hours.
There we go. So there's a solemnity, there's an idea that marriage is a really significant thing. And it wasn't an eternal contract. What was the first 2 lines, Robin?
A contract of eternal bond of love, confirmed by mutual joinder of your hands, attested by the holy close of lips, strengthened by interchangement of your rings.
So that's the dream. That's the dream of marriage. And that's what his characters in his comedies are trying to move towards. If you look at the tragedies, all the marriages go badly wrong. They're all toxic, whether it's Othello with Desdemona or it's the Macbeths, it all goes badly wrong. In the comedies, that isn't the landscape. In the comedies, the movement is towards something much more beautiful and much more kind of joyous, much more positive. And in any great Shakespearean comedy, you should believe that that dream is possible, that you have to find the love in the plays. And that's where the stakes of the plays begins. The other big thing is also the tension of that love and how it interacts with everybody else. And we'll see in the 4 plays that we're about to do how different those things work. So the landscape, I'm just going to very, very briefly sketch in. We're not really look at a scene from Midsummer Night's Dream, but the key thing in Midsummer Night's Dream is that at the heart of it is Oberon and Titania. And although we call them fairies, essentially they're pagan gods. And a central image that was circulating at Shakespeare's time, an alchemical image, was called the divine marriage, the idea of the king and the queen marrying, which brings harmony. And if you look at Midsummer Night's Dream, it's clear in the play that the harmony between Oberon and Titania defines how all the society works. When they first meet, they're against each other, they're angry with each other. And you'll see that Titania talks about how everything is being knocked out of kilter, the whole of society, the magical world, the world of the fairies. And at the end of the play, when everything is resolved, they come on right at the end and they bless together. There's a wonderful stage direction that they dance. So those 2 figures, the god and the goddess, they dance together and they bless the house at the end of the play. And that's the midsummer celebration. And that's the archetype of all the plays. That's what's hanging over them all, is the attempt to find this. So the beautiful thing about Shakespearean comedies is that's what they explore. What's extraordinary about them, again, which we talked about, when I talked about how Greek drama is very good for women, the beautiful thing about Shakespearean comedies is that women are always the prime protagonists. They have always the energy behind it. And what you discover as the characters go is that the women who are often doing the running in terms of finding out what love is and finding out what their partners are going to be. So the first scene we're going to look at is a scene from As You Like It. Those of you who don't know the story of As You Like It, you start in the court, there's strife in the court, and the main characters are exiled, thrown out of the court by people who've taken over. And they gather in a wood, the Forest of Arden, where the rightful Duke has escaped with his followers. And basically, into the wood, all these different characters assemble. And while they're in the wood, they interact. It's the most extraordinarily, it's a play without a story. That's the most extraordinary thing about it. What Shakespeare does is he creates all these different characters: Rosalind, Orlando, Jaques, who's this melancholy philosopher, Touchstone, who's a kind of sexy clown, And he puts them all together in the forest, and he just lets them interact. And I've always felt that As You Like It is like a jazz piece where you see all the different flavors of these characters. They just interact, and gradually in the middle of that, there's this extraordinary woman called Rosalind, who is pursuing Orlando. Now, they've met each other early on in the court, and they've fallen in love. But Rosalind, when she escapes the court, has to disguise herself as a man because it's the only way of keeping safe in the open world. And she goes with her with Celia, who remains a woman, as Eliana. And they go into the forest, and Rosalind encounters Orlando. Now, you're never entirely sure whether Orlando realizes it's Rosalind or not. But Rosalind decides she's going to find out who Orlando is. So she challenges him dressed as a man. He tells her that he's in love with Rosalind. He's posted all these awful poems on the trees. So Rosalind decides to challenge him. She makes an agreement with him that she will try and woo him out of being in love with Rosalind. She will make fun of love. She will take him on a journey where she will test him. And the beauty of the play is that Orlando passes the test all the way through. That no matter how hard she works to try and make fun of him or be cynical about love, he stays very still in himself, almost religiously faithful to Rosalind, which of course makes her fall in love with him all the more. So in this scene, which is about halfway through, Rosalind this is her second or third meeting with him, and he's going to have another go at challenging him. So we've got Kayleigh, who is going to play Rosalind. We've got Joe, who is going to play Celia, and we've got Danny, who's going to play Orlando. Off you go. Oh, hang on, Kayleigh, you need to unmute. Shakespeare always works best if you can hear people speaking. Okay, here we go.
Why, how now, Orlando? Where have you been all this while? You, a lover, and you served me such another trick. Never come in my sight more.
My fair Rosalind, I come within an hour of my promise.
Break an hour's promise in love. He that will divide a minute into 1,000 parts and break but a part of the 1,000th part of a minute in the affairs of love, it may be said of him that Cupid had clapped him on the shoulder, but I'll warrant him whole heart.
Pardon me, dear Rosalind.
Nay, and you be so tardy, come no more in my sight. I had as lief be wooed of a snail.
Of a snail?
Aye, of a snail. Although he comes slowly, he carries his house on his head. A better jointure, I think, than you make a woman. Besides, he brings his destiny with him.
What's that?
Why, horns, which such as you are fain to be beholding to your wives for. But he comes armed in his fortune and prevents the slander of his wife.
Virtue is no horn maker, and my Rosalind is virtuous.
And I am your Rosalind.
It pleases him to call you so, but he hath a Rosalind of a better leer than you.
Come, woo me, woo me. For now I am in a holiday humour, and like enough to consent. What would you say to me now, and I were your very Rosalind?
I would kiss before I spoke.
Nay, and you were better speak first, and when you were gravelled for lack of matter, you might take occasion to kiss. Very good orators, when they are out, they will spit, and for lovers lacking, God warn us, matter, the cleanliest shift is to kiss.
How if the kiss be denied?
Then she puts you to entreaty, and there begins new matter.
Who could be out, being before his beloved mistress?
Marry, that should you, if I were your mistress, or I should think my honesty ranker than my wit.
What, of my suit?
Not out of your apparel, and yet out of your suit. Am I not your Rosalind?
I take some joy to say you are, because I would be talking of her.
Well, in her person, I will say I will not have you.
Then in mine own person I die.
No, faith, die by attorney. The poor world is almost 6,000 years old, and in all this time there was not any man died in his own person, fidelicit, in a love cause. Troilus had his brains dashed out with a Grecian club, yet he did what he could to die before, and he is one of the patterns of love. Leander, he would have lived many a fair year, though hero had turned none, if it had not been for a hot midsummer night. For, good youth, he went but forth to wash him in the Hellespont, and being taken with the cramp was drowned, and the foolish coroners of that age found it was hero of Sestos. But these are all lies. Men have died from time to time, and worms have eaten them, but not for love.
I would not have my right Rosalind of this mind, for I protest her frown might kill me.
By this hand it will not kill a fly. But come, now, I will be your Rosalind in a more coming on disposition, and ask me what you will, I will grant it.
Then love me, dear Rosalind.
Yes, faith, will I. Fridays, and Saturdays, and all.
And wilt thou have me?
Aye, and 20 such.
What sayest thou?
Are not you good?
I hope so.
Why then, can one desire too much of a good thing? Come, sister, you shall be the priest and marry us. Give me your hand, Orlando. What do you say, sister?
Pray thee, marry us.
I cannot say the words.
You must begin, will you, Orlando?
Where to? Will you, Orlando, have to wife this Rosalind?
I will.
Aye, but when?
Why, now, as fast as she can marry us.
Then you must say, I take thee, Rosalind, for wife.
I take thee, Rosalind, for wife.
I might ask you for your commission, but I do take thee, Orlando, for my husband. As a girl goes before the priest, and certainly a woman's thought runs before her actions.
So do all thoughts. They are winged.
Now tell me how long you would have her after you have possessed her.
Forever and a day.
Say a day without the ever. No, no, Orlando. Men are April when they woo, December when they wed. Maids are May when they are maids, but the sky changes when they are wives. I will be more jealous of thee than a Barbary cock pigeon over his hen, more clamorous than a parrot against rain, more newfangled than an ape, more giddy in my desires than a monkey. I will weep for nothing, like Diana in the fountain, and I will do that when you are disposed to be merry. I will laugh like a hyena, and that when thou art inclined to sleep.
But will my Rosalind do so?
By my life, she will do as I do.
Oh, but she is wise.
Or else she could not have the wit to do this. The wiser, the waywarder. Make the doors upon a woman's wit, and it will out at the casement. Shut that, and 'twill at the keyhole. Stop that, 'twill fly with the smoke out at the chimney.
A man that had a wife with such a wit, he might say, wit with a wilt.
Nay, you might keep that check for it till you met your wife's wit go into your neighbour's bed.
And what wit could wit have to excuse that?
Marry, to say she came to seek you there. You shall never take her without her answer, unless you take her without her tongue. Oh, that woman that cannot make her fault her husband's occasion. Let her never nurse her child herself, for she will breed it like a fool.
For these 2 hours, Rosalind, I will leave thee.
Alas, dear love, I cannot lack thee 2 hours.
I must attend the Duke at dinner. By 2 o'clock, I will be with thee again.
Aye, go your ways, go your ways. I knew what you would prove. My friends told me as much, and I thought no less. That flattering tongue of yours won me. 'Tis but one cast away, and so come, death. 2 o'clock is your hour?
Aye, sweet Rosalind.
By my troth, and in good earnest, and so God mend me, and by all pretty oaths that are not dangerous, if you break one jot of your promise, or come 1 minute behind your hour, I will think you the most pathetical break promise, and the most hollow lover, and the most unworthy of her you call Rosalind, that may be chosen out of the gross band of the unfaithful. Therefore, beware my censure, and keep your promise.
With no less religion than if thou wert indeed my Rosalind. So, adieu.
Well, time is the old justice that examines all such offenders, and let time try. Adieu.
You have simply misused our sex in your love prate. We must have your doublet hose plucked over your head and show the world what the bird hath done to her own nest.
Oh, cars, my pretty little cars, that thou did know how many fathom deep I am in love. It cannot be sounded. My affection hath an unknown bottom, like the Bay of Portugal.
Or rather, bottomless, that as fast as you pour affection in it, it runs out.
No, that same wicked bastard of Venus that was begot of thought, conceived of spleen and born of madness, that blind rascal boy that abuses everyone's eyes because his own are out, let him be judge how deep I am in love. I tell thee, Aliena, I cannot be out of the sight of Orlando. I'll go and find a shadow and sigh till he come.
And I'll sleep.
Good, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So it's quite a long little scene there, but really well, beautifully read to everybody. Anybody want to make any comments on that? Anything you want to ask? No? Okay, so what did you notice about it?
I have a question.
Yes. Go on, Annie.
I just wondered, when there's a comment about Leander and the Midsummer, is that deliberately referring to Midsummer Night's Dream, or is that just a coincidence?
No, it's Lysander that you're thinking of. Leander is
yeah,
hero.
I know, it just seems similar.
Well, I think what it is okay, that's a classic example though, because with that sequence, what she's doing, all the different people that she mentions are famous lovers of history. They're famous lovers in classical literature and famous lovers in poetry, and she's sending them all up all the way through the scene. So it's not necessarily referring to Midsummer Night's Dream, but what she's doing is basically putting a bomb under all the ideas that anybody in the past ever was truly in love. None of them died for love. They all died. Leander died swimming in the sea and got a cold, so he didn't die of love, he died of a cold, etc., etc. All of it is her trying to create this kind of way of challenging Orlando's love. Do you see what I mean? So it's not specifically referring to Midsummer Night's Dream, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? No. So the big thing about that scene, it was beautifully read, is that all the way through this, Rosalind is dressed as a man. So this and the whole key of the scene is the sexual chemistry between her and Orlando, and the kind of danger that they're kind of playing with each other. She's able to talk to him like that because she's dressed as a man. And actually, in that society at that time, it's a quite interesting thing. I don't know if you know about this. In the Bible, a woman dressing as a man, in other words, wearing trousers, is seen as a sin. It's breaking biblical law. So for Rosalind or Portia or Viola to dress up as a man, she's completely violating all the kind of social norms of that society. But the power of it is that it gives Rosalind a freedom to suddenly move around in the world that she isn't given if she comes as a woman. Do you see what I mean? So she's able to move around in this world. She's freer. People give her a different kind of respect. And she's also able to explore her own masculinity in the scene. And the big question there, the joke is that it's Rosalind dressed as a boy, Ganymede, who is a male lover of Zeus, pretending to be Rosalind so that she can flirt and try and challenge Orlando's love. And you never know in all the scenes when Orlando flirts back, whether Orlando himself thinks that he's flirting with Rosalind, so he's in on the game and he knows what's happening, or whether he's actually flirting with a man. Do you see what I mean? So if you're interested in gender fluidity, and I think this is one of the most interesting things about Shakespeare, is that he is absolutely the playwright of the time now. He's dealing with that. And at the end of the play, when Rosalind eventually reveals herself as Rosalind, Orlando doesn't bat an eyelid. He doesn't at any point go, hang on a second, were you not dressed as a man? Or were you not? He just completely takes it in his stride and the two of them stay lovers. What did you notice about how they both spoke? The difference, anybody? It's quite obvious. Yes, Robin.
No, I was putting my hand up for something else.
Oh, okay, no worry. What did you notice about how they both spoke? Kayleigh, what did you notice about the difference between where you were speaking and the way Danny was speaking?
Yeah, she's got a lot to say. It's a lot behind it.
Weren't his answers very brief and to the point? And she was extremely expansive and poetic, and very
exactly so. What Shakespeare does is
verse versus prose as well.
Sorry,
I said, isn't it verse versus prose?
well, actually, it's all prose, isn't it, Kayleigh? That's the interesting thing. The interesting, but you wouldn't know it from the way that the energy of the language works. And actually, you can write out Shakespearean prose as verse, and it has exactly the same rhythms as the verse. Interestingly enough, but the point, Roman's point, is that the beauty of the scene is that the traditional idea of the man being the wooer is got rid of, and it becomes the woman who does the wooing. And she's the one with the verbal fireworks, she's the one with the wit, she's the one with the kind of massive sparkle, she's the one who's drawing on classical analogies, she's the one who takes everything he says, turns it on its head. But all the way through it, he speaks, as Ramin was saying, he's a man of not very many words, but each time he speaks, it's very, very much to the point. So, and at the end of the scene, when he goes off, and Kayleigh, Rosalind has that beautiful thing about how in love I am with him. The point there is that no matter how hard she tries to put him off his stride, he stays religiously true to the love that he feels for Orlando. And what Shakespeare's created is the first big, strong, silent type in literature. Orlando is the first male hero who doesn't say very much. And what appeals to him, to her, about him, is that he isn't a windbag, that he is sincere, he speaks from the heart. And actually this love that he feels is rooted. Do you see what I mean? But the only way she'd be able to find that out is by pretending to be a man. If she was in the court, she would never learn that about Orlando. Do you see what I mean? She has this opportunity, this freedom to explore all this, and it's that which gives her the chance to find out what this man she loves is really all about. And if you look at it really closely, the way she talks when he's gone is truly how she speaks. All the humor is, all the kind of mockery of love is taken away, and instead she just talks about how genuinely in love she is with him. And in a really fantastic production of it, it's her pursuit of him and his quiet loyalty to her that should absolutely enchant you in the production. And the beauty of the play, for those of you who don't know it, is that, of course, having found this character of Ganymede, Rosalind has enormous charisma, so everybody falls in love with her. Shepherdesses fall in love with her. All sorts of people start chasing after her. She becomes the focus of everybody. Everybody's interested in what she's got to say. She is kind of the energy center of the whole play. And it's through her pursuit of her love that there's this weird knock-on effect that everything somehow comes out right at the end. But I think what's lovely there is that's, if you think about Shakespeare's times, it's a very male-dominated society, a very patriarchal society. Again, he's turning it on his head. And I often think that these beautiful comedies with these extraordinary women must have been parts inspired by Elizabeth I, having this queen in charge of this male society, who's running rings around everybody, who's cleverer than everybody else, smarter than everybody else. So the possibility he saw in this woman and these women, he reflected in the plays that he wrote. Does that make sense? Yes, Robin.
Do you think he was conscious of an extra frisson from the fact that these women playing men were played by men?
Boys, yes, yeah. Well, absolutely.
I would find kind of, a really enjoyable kind of, messing with your head.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that this again is the other interesting about, in the Elizabethan period, bisexuality was something that was very common, and if you're aware of, and it was accepted in men, interestingly enough, that men often had male lovers or objects of desire as well as female lovers. And if you read the sonnets, some of the most famous love sonnets are actually written to a man rather than a woman. What Shakespeare does is very cleverly avoid quite being explicit as to what they all are.
Do we know that?
Yes, we do. Yeah. Well, I mean,
do we know that, or is that a strongly held?
Well, if you look at the text if you look at the full-on text, it becomes clear in the language that it is a man, and then a woman appears later on. So the language changes, and the relationship doesn't mean that necessarily he had sex with this young man.
No.
Because quite often there is this idea of the platonic love, the Socratic love of an older man for a younger man, like a kind of mentor.
Romance.
Yes, exactly. And actually, one of the interesting things about Shakespeare is that a lot of his men struggle when they have full-on sexual relationships with women. They can be tormented by it. They can get fucked up about it. Othello, Leontes. Whereas there are often these strange kind of what's the best way of putting them? Not sexual relationships, but very powerful connections between men, like in A Winter's Tale, Polixenes and Leontes, who one of the reasons why Leontes goes crazy is because he thinks that his wife Hermione is getting between them and is pursuing his best friend. So there's a lot of very complex sexual relationships going on for the men in these plays. But in these early ones, the reason I wanted to start with As You Like It, because it is the famous first trouser play. Although Shakespeare had used the device before, he used it in Two Gentlemen of Verona, he didn't use it quite as well. And you do see Shakespeare recycling ideas and getting better at them. But in this one, the interesting thing about Rosalind is that she's full of swagger. She's almost like an Aries. Do you know what I mean? She's a woman who, when she gets in touch with her masculinity, really enjoys it and really goes for it, and enjoys the freedom, enjoys the authority, enjoys the mischief and the fun that she can make. When you get on to Twelfth Night, which is Shakespeare's other play, with the famous character who is dressed as a woman, Viola is very different, and we'll get on to that in a second. She's coming next. Viola is much more reticent, much shyer, much more introverted, and this is another side to Shakespeare that I'll talk about in a sec. But the other thing is so to go back to what Robin was saying, in terms of, as you know, in Shakespeare's day, women weren't allowed to perform on the stage. Only men could do it. So the women characters are always played by boys, highly trained, extraordinary young male actors. And when you actually look at the plays, and they had to tend to be prepubescent, so they were 13, 14, around that age, before their voices dropped. And you often sit there looking at these plays and think, how on earth does a 13-year-old male play some of these extraordinary parts? Because they are astonishingly difficult, very extraordinary pieces of work. So yes, as what Robin was trying to say there is that you have a boy playing a woman who in the play is pretending to be a man and is wooing a man who thinks it's a woman or a man. Do you see what I mean? So that's what I mean by the gender fluidity of it all. Now, I personally don't think that if Shakespeare was alive today, he would have boys play the part. I think he'd rather have women and release that energy into women, but it wasn't allowed at the time. An interesting thing, just as a side note, this is actually quite fun, is Shakespeare wrote with a company of actors in mind. So he knew who was going to play what. And if you look at Shakespeare, if you ever know Shakespeare's plays well enough and you're bored, you can play the game of working out who was playing what. So if you read all the comedies, you realise that there were two boys in particular who played all the doubles, who played Rosalind and Celia, Portia and Jessica, Hermia and Helena, what's the other one? Hero and Beatrice. One of them was tall and blonde and the other one was short and dark. And there are jokes throughout these plays about this. I think, as I remember, there's a whole sequence where in Midsummer Night's Dream they mock each other for
absolutely. Yeah.
And they're totally insecure about their looks. So even in Elizabethan times, young women were insecure about their looks. Interestingly, everybody was.
Body shaming.
Body issues, exactly.
Body
so that's all there. And men too. So that's the kind of the genius of it. So you can then, the other interesting thing, particularly with the comedies, is there were two key comic actors that Shakespeare worked with, one of whom died halfway through Shakespeare's career. The first one was Will Kemp, and Will Kemp was famous for playing what you call the stupid characters. So he played characters like Bottom and Costar and Dogberry, and he was great physical comedy, but he always played kind of big idiots. Do you know what I mean? And then when he died, he was replaced by Robert Arnim, who was a completely different kind of comic, who was intellectual and fast and sparky and could do impressions and all these different things. And that's, you can see in Shakespeare's plays where that happens. Feste was Robert Arnim. The Fool was Robert Arnim. Autolycus was Robert Arnim. So it's more the kind of trickster figure, the Protean figure.
Was Jaques him?
No, I think Jaques. No, I don't think Jaques was. Because I don't think they ever acted with each other. But there was a flip over, and what you can see Shakespeare doing is getting excited. Sorry.
No, I was just working out from where you said that presumably Kemp played Touchstone.
Yes, well, Armin would probably have played Touchstone. Exactly. So there would have been a crossover. Kemp. Well, Touchstone is more an Arnim character.
Yeah.
With the sexy kind of swagger character. But what's really interesting is if you look at how Shakespeare works, you can see him being inspired by his actors. So in Twelfth Night, he obviously got very excited by Feste, the actor playing Feste, because he gives him a little tribute, and then you can see him obviously decide, and this, I'm going to write the fool, to take that comic character, that actor who was famous for playing comedy, and put him right in the middle of the greatest tragedy, one of the greatest tragedies ever written, and take that actor's skills and go, right, we're going to push this out, you're going to play something else now. Do you see what I mean? And you can also see in his plays, I think, evidence of how he wrote as he went, and he rewrote, and the actors would ask him to do things. I remember when I was doing Much Ado About Nothing, there's a completely random, the character of Margaret, who has 2 scenes where I'm convinced that actor said, I want something, can you write something for me in this play, because I've got nothing to do. So he wrote these 2 scenes. You can have that. Do you see what I mean? The other infuriating thing about Shakespeare, which comes out of that, is that he knew that whenever a character had to come on as a messenger and give a wonderful speech, he would have an actor who could do it. So it could be, okay, I'm going to play Iago in this one, but I don't really want a big part in the next one. That's fine, I'll make you a messenger. So the bane of a theatre director when you're casting Shakespeare now is you come up with a scene like in Winter's Tale, the third messenger who comes on and delivers these wonderful, wonderful speeches in the last act that doesn't appear anywhere else. And nobody ever wants to play him. Do you know, who wants to play a messenger? No actor wants to play a messenger. I want to play a character with a name. Shakespeare knew who was going to play it, so it wasn't a problem. So you're stuck casting your Leontes with your best actor and your Hermione, and you've got to find someone to play these messengers. It's like in Romeo and Juliet, the prince starts and ends each act and has some really important speeches. It's a really hard part to cast because it's not a very good part. Do you know what I mean? No one's, if you come to someone and say, would you like to play the prince? They go, well, I'd rather play Friar Lawrence, or I'd rather play Captain. I don't want to play the prince. What the fuck off? Don't talk to me. Pardon me for swearing there. But he knew how to do, he had his actors to do that.
Yeah.
And
apparently
sorry, Robin?
I read recently that in the, what do you call the autograph copies, the few original copies I've got, he'll sometimes refer to the clown as CLO.
Yes,
just
shorthand.
You know, just generic clown. Or he'll refer to him by name of the actor, or he'll refer to him by name of the character. So you know, they've had to kind of rationalize it all because he knew who he was talking about, but he called them different things every time they came on.
Exactly. Yeah. So as I say, if you really are bored in the COVID-19, get your plays out and just start working out who played what, and that'll have quite a lot of fun with that. I mean, for instance, I don't think Will Kemp sang, so none of his comic characters sing, whereas Arnim could. So Arnim's characters sing all the time. Feste has some wonderful songs. And whoever played Rosalind and Celia, they must have been extraordinary young men. Do you know what I mean? To be able to play that complexity. Now the interesting thing there is that so that's, I was just kind of throwing things at the wall at the moment. I hope that's okay, because it's such a huge subject. You only touch on certain things, but the real enjoyment of something like As You Like It is finding the sexual chemistry and the delight in the wit. The language is the way that you woo. Do you see what I mean? The other big thing with Shakespeare, of course, is that the majority of his audience couldn't even read. When people talk about Shakespeare being elitist, the groundlings, the people who stood, couldn't read. And one of the ways in which, like that speech that you mentioned, Anuli, about Leander, that's full of classical references. No one in the audience who couldn't read would know who any of those people were. The scholars at the top and the aristocrats at the top would have heard it, but the ones at the bottom would have gone, Leander, great, I don't know who you're talking about. But that wasn't the point. The point was that actually the glory of that was that when those people who couldn't read came to this, they were suddenly opened up to this wonderful mythical world. They were expanded by it. And the other thing I often say to actors when they do Shakespeare is that Shakespeare used language as his CGI. When he suddenly goes drifting off into wonderful lyrical fantasies about the ancient world, or mentions mythology and all these different things, particularly something like The Tempest, it's the language is the CGI, is the special effects. He didn't have much in the way of set and costume or anything like that. Most of the time, everything was done in doublet and hose. It wasn't done period or anything like that. But the language always conjured it up. And there's a wonderful expression somebody once said to me, is that in every Shakespeare play, there's usually 2 encounters with the set. You either see the set and then someone describes it. Do you see what I mean? And the reason why someone always describes it is Shakespeare didn't have a set. but the words were there to do it for you. So although nowadays we might create a forest for Arden, Shakespeare wouldn't have needed that. It would have been done through the language and the way they moved and they talked. And that gives you an indication of how hard those audiences listened in those days, to sit there and listen to that language and be carried away with it. Language which we find hard to understand was a remarkable thing to do. So that's As You Like It. Any more questions on that one? We're going to move on to Twelfth Night in a sec. No? Is everything going well? Everyone's happy? Good, excellent, big thumbs up. So Twelfth Night. So Twelfth Night, the reason I'm not doing them all in chronological order here, because I'm just slightly jumping around. Twelfth Night, to say it's kind of a follow-up or a rewrite of As You Like It isn't very accurate. It's only interesting because he goes even further with the images that he used in As You Like It. In As You Like It, the magical land is the Forest of Arden. In Midsummer Night's Dream, it's the forest outside Athens. In As You Like, Twelfth Night, you're somewhere completely magical, Lyria, which technically speaking is in modern former Yugoslavia. I think it's part of Croatia. And in that play, those of you who don't know the story, Viola is a young woman who's a twin. She's one half of the twin. Her other half is Sebastian. And they're both shipwrecked. And at the beginning of the play, Viola is washed up on the shore of Illyria, and she has no idea whether her brother is alive or dead. And her decision, she hears in the court nearby is Court Orsino, who's the local duke. And she knows of him because he had some connection with her father. So she decides, like Rosalind, she's going to dress as a man and she's going to join Orsino's court because it's the safest place to be. So she becomes a character called Cesario and she joins Orsino's court. Now Orsino is the classic wounded lover. He's very much in love with Olivia, who lives in the kind of major family nearby. Now Olivia is mourning her brother who has died, in the same way that Viola thinks her brother has died. And Orsino, rather than actually going to Olivia and saying, hello, I'm in love with you, will you marry me, sends people to do it for him. And Olivia is not interested. And what happens is Orsino sends Cesario to give a love message to Olivia. And she goes, Viola goes dressed as Cesario, and Olivia falls in love with him or her. So Olivia falls in love with Cesario, not aware that it's actually Viola. This is where it all gets very complicated. As the play continues, Viola falls in love with Orsino and spends a lot of time with him, still disguised as Cesario. And there are moments in their interaction where, because Orsino thinks that Viola is a boy, he opens up to her emotionally about his feelings and his grief and all these different things. And as a consequence, the two of them become very close. And Viola is in the same way that with Rosalind dressed as a man, she's able to swagger. Viola is able to become intimate with the man that she falls in love with and very close with him. The problem she has is she's frightened of telling him who she really is, because it would be she's a bit scared that if she said, actually, I'm a woman and I'm in love with you, he might go, ah, or something like that, who knows? But she can't do it. She's too afraid. She's too shy. And this is the interesting difference between Rosalind and Viola. Is Rosalind is extrovert, but Viola is introvert. And one of the things I will say about Shakespeare is he was the first person to create introverted characters. And what I mean by that is if you look at the tragedies, when he brings in the soliloquy, because we share the soliloquy, we forget that the only person who's hearing the soliloquy is us and the character. But all the other characters on the play don't hear what the soliloquy is sharing. So for instance, it's an interesting exercise. If you pick up Macbeth, if you take out all the soliloquies, you don't have much play left. And you also realize that Lady Macbeth doesn't hear any of the soliloquies. So we get to know Macbeth extraordinarily well. We share with him his every movement emotionally. She doesn't get access to any of that. And the reason for this is that what Shakespeare was doing was creating a situation where men in particular couldn't express their emotions outwardly to the people around them. So they expressed them inwardly. Hamlet soliloquies, Macbeth soliloquies, Othello soliloquies. Do you see what I mean? It's privacy. It's the inhibited side of people. And he was absolutely the first person to do that. Marlowe's characters are much more extrovert. Greek tragedy characters, they say what they mean. Shakespeare's characters hide what they feel. And this is where you get into this whole issue of disguise. And that's the interesting thing. In Midsummer Night's Dream, there's magic. They don't know who's in love. Are they in love? Or is it a magic potion? Are there fairies? Is it a donkey? What's going on? In As You Like It, Rosalind is disguised as a man. She's disguised. She hides who she truly is so she can find out who she really loves. In Twelfth Night, Viola is completely hidden and doesn't, at the end of the play, reveal herself as a woman, doesn't wear women's clothes. She tells Orsino she will do that after. And Twelfth Night is all about inhibition, and it's all about being afraid of emotion. Olivia, there's no reason for Olivia to mourn her brother as long as she shuts herself into the house and refuses to come out. Orsino shuts himself in the house and refuses to come out. Instead of it being about extrovert people who go out and get what they want, it's about shy, introverted people who are locked inside themselves. It's a much subtler play. So the first scene we're going to look at, Robin, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just, for the first time, you talking just now just made me realise that you've got Orsino, who's kind of a bit carried away, the classic thing, in love with being in love. You've got Olivia, who's in love with being in grief. And in the middle of it, you've got Viola, who's, because you said, she's just lost her brother too.
Yeah.
Viola thinks she's lost her brother too, but she just picks herself up and gets on and does something. I don't know if that's significant, but it's just the first time I've ever kind of clocked that. And I know it's played quite well, I thought.
No, that's absolutely right. And the interesting thing is, the Twelfth Night, it was one of the first plays that was done in the Inner Temple. It wasn't performed in Shakespeare's Globe or the Rose. And the Inner Temple was indoor. It was almost a studio space. And physically speaking, I'm putting my hands up here. So if this is the audience, Orsino's court was on one side and Olivia's was on the other, and Viola moved between them. So you have this situation where literally what you're saying, Robin, is that Viola is shifting between these two worlds. And this world in the middle is inhabited by all the other characters, Feste, Toby Belch, Andrew Aguchi, Malvolio. But it's Viola who shifts between the two of them and doesn't know, after a while, starts to forget whether she's a man or a woman herself. She doesn't really know who she is. And that's what makes Twelfth Night so interesting, is it's about how it takes the issue of gender fluidity and goes completely about, God, who actually am I? I don't actually know who I am. And there are certain points where Viola herself starts to worry about who she really is. And at the heart of it also is this figure of Feste, who is a brilliant character, who is the jester character. But the genius of Feste, if you look at it closely, is whenever he interacts with anybody, he diagnoses them and he delivers his jokes to make fun of them and shock them out of the emotion that they're in, but he does it as a joke so they never notice it. So the wonderful scene where he says where Olivia is sitting there going, oh, my poor husband, my poor brother is dead, that's why I'm not going out. He says, where is your brother now? And she says, I think he's in heaven. She says, no, I think she's in hell. He's in hell. And she says, no, he's absolutely in heaven. And then he says, then why are you mourning him? What's the problem? Why are you mourning him? But he does it as a joke. And there's another point where he's talking to Orsino, and he talks about the god of melancholy. And he can see everyone's problems and he diagnoses it in his jokes. And the one character he can't get a sense of is Viola. He doesn't work out what Viola's all about. But I saw the best performance of Feste I ever saw. Derek Griffiths played. I don't know if you've heard of Derek Griffiths, a great kind of English actor. And he based the character on Frankie Howerd. Didn't play him like Frankie Howerd, but what he said was that he picked up on the fact that a lot of comedians are depressives. And he picked up that with Frankie Howerd, the story goes that when he was being filmed, he'd be all animate and wonderful and everyone would love him. And as soon as it stopped, he just went completely into not talking to anybody and would go. And what he played was not just this jester, which is what usually you get with Feste. He played all the humor. It was wonderfully funny. But there were moments when the camera wasn't rolling and you saw him become a character who probably understood himself and everybody else far too much than anyone else. And then the character became the center of the whole thing. So, and the point about Feste is he wears masks. He presents himself as a different person to everybody. And again, at the center of it, you have this jester who you don't know who he really is. Robin, you've got a raised hand again.
Yeah, sorry, it's just good. I know this one quite well. But You said earlier on that Viola was kind of like what was the word you used, that she was afraid of telling him who she was?
Yeah, reluctant, shy, I think is the word I used.
Yeah, and I always think actually one of the things that makes it such a great play for me is that she's, to use modern parlance, she's conflicted, because she would love to tell him she loves him, but the man she loves
Someone else.
Olivia.
Exactly.
And she's conflicted because she cannot bring herself to betray that love by mucking up, by saying, I love you.
Absolutely.
Sort of suppressing her own feelings to be a faithful servant to what she said she's going to do for him, which is, I think, a really interesting dilemma for her.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And I think also the other interesting thing about that play is it is also about, the other thing is Orsino is safer longing for Olivia than actually having Olivia. Do you know what I mean? And the same thing for Olivia. Olivia is safer sitting at home dressed in black, not going out, than actually going out. And Malvolio, who's the classic character, who's completely repressed, when he suddenly decides Olivia's in love with him, goes completely bonkers. Do you know what I mean? And the point about the play is it's also about repressed people. It's about shy people, introverted people who are actually frightened of stepping out and actually seizing the day in the way that Rosalind does. And that's another one. It's a play about insecurity as well as all the things we're saying. And I think that's actually a very beautiful thing.
Isn't it also about the reversals? Because Twelfth Night was about the masters became the servants and the servants became the masters. And I've always felt there's a very strong element of that in Malvolio lords it, and Toby Belch is hanging out with the servants, and so there's this whole thing of people being what they're not.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no. And that's all embedded in the script in ways. But Nuala, you've got a hand up.
I just wanted to make a comment about what you said about disguise in this play. I think the interesting thing about the fact that Viola is the one in disguise is that I think she uncovers that everybody else is in this performative phase as well. And even though she's the one physically in disguise, she's maybe the one who's most true to herself in the end, whereas she actually uncovers everybody. And maybe even arguably when Malvolio goes into this kind of crazy situation with the yellow tights, he's actually coming out of a disguise.
Absolutely. Well put, Ali. I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's similar also with Rosalind. And Rosalind likes being the centre of things. Viola doesn't, but even still becomes the centre of things. Do you see what I mean? She becomes the focus. Absolutely right. And that's my point, is I think it's a play about introverted people coming out of themselves, whereas if anything, As You Like It is about extroverted people getting in touch with their inner selves. Do you know what I mean? With Orlando. So all of that is absolutely right. There's also two quick things I wanted to say about that is how much, without getting too wooey about this, one of the big influences on Shakespeare was alchemy. Now people don't take alchemy seriously anymore, but at the time of Shakespeare, alchemy was a universal science. It was a medicine, and it was also a kind of spiritual system for transformation of the soul. And you'll find Shakespeare is studded with images of it, like the lead, silver and golden casket in Merchant of Venice. The first speech that Friar Lawrence gives when he comes on is almost an absolute lift of an alchemist called Basil Valentinus. And part of the point about alchemy was about transformation, personal transformation, spiritual transformation, emotional transformation. And this, I think, is a profound influence on the comedies. In that, what I was saying earlier on is that they're very much about people transforming and changing. Shakespeare believed that human nature could change, human beings could change and shift. And I didn't realize that until I was thinking about this very recently. And it's quite a revolutionary idea, particularly when you think in the time of people understood, people like Ben Jonson was writing about every man in his humour, that everybody was dominated by a particular humour. You couldn't necessarily change. Nobody changes in Ben Jonson. In Marlowe plays, they go for something and they crash, but they don't necessarily change. Shakespeare's plays, they're transformed. And one of the key images in alchemy is androgyny. The androgyne. The idea is that you have a physical sex, but you also have the opposite of that. Men have a feminine side, women have a masculine side. And in alchemy, the ultimate goal of spiritual transformation is when these two parts of us come together in whatever combination, and we become men, woman, women, if you know what I mean. And the magic of As You Like It, the magic of Twelfth Night is that's embodied in Sebastian and Viola. And again, the bisexuality, the fluid sexuality of the play is partly an exploration of that. The characters get lost in it, but they're also magically transformed by it. It's also one of the plays where there's an almost, depending on how you want to play it, an almost overtly homosexual character, Antonio, who is in love with Sebastian. And if you look at how Antonio talks about Sebastian, if you then go to Midsummer Night, not just Merchant of Venice, and you look at how Antonio talks about Bassanio in that play, the idea that Antonio is in love with Bassanio becomes much clearer. So Twelfth Night is actually an incredibly modern play in its understanding of sexuality and gender, in a way which, weirdly enough, it's almost as if this is the first time in history where it's allowed to be fully in that way. So we're just going to look at one of the scenes. Robin's disappeared. Are you still there, Robin? Maybe he's gone to the loo. This scene is the first time that Viola meets Olivia. Now, I'm going to have to read in one line. If you can imagine me, gender fluidity, I'm going to play Maria the maid. Now, in this scene, it's the first time Viola meets Olivia. Viola has been sent by Orsino. Viola at this point is disguised as Cesario to woo Olivia. Olivia decides to have a game with him or her, and she puts on a mask, a veil, and she asks Maria to put on a veil as well, so that Viola has no idea who she's talking to. So wait for me to get the page, and then we can go. Here we are. So, all right, off you go. Kayleigh will play Viola, Joe will play Olivia, and I will play Maria. I'll try and do I won't do the accent. Okay.
The Honourable Lady of the House, which is she?
Speak to me. I shall answer for her. Your will?
Most radiant, exquisite and unmatchable beauty. I pray you, tell me if this be the lady of the house, for I never saw her. I would be loath to cast away my speech, for besides that it is excellently well penned, I have taken great pains to con it. Good beauties, let me sustain no scorn. I am very comfortable even to the least sinister usage.
Whence came you, sir?
I say more than I have studied, and that question's out of my part. Good gentle one, give me modest assurance, if you be the lady of the house, that I may proceed in my speech.
Are you a comedian?
No, my profound heart, and yet by the very fangs of malice, I swear I am not that I play. Are you the lady of the house?
If I do not usurp myself, I am.
Most certain, if you are she, you do usurp yourself, for what is yours to bestow is not yours to reserve. But this is from my permission. I will on with my speech in your praise, and then show you the heart of my message.
Come to what is important in't. I forgive you the praise.
Alas, I take pains to study it, and 'tis poetical.
It is the more like to be feigned. I pray you keep it in. I heard you were saucy at my gates, and allowed your approach rather to wonder at you than to hear you. If you be not mad, be gone. If you have reason, be brief. 'Tis not that time of moon with me to make one in so skipping a dialogue.
Will you hoist sail, sir? Here lies your way.
No, good swabber, I am to hull here a little longer. Some mollification for your giant, sweet lady. Tell me your mind. I am a messenger.
Sure, you have some hideous matter to deliver when the courtesy of it is so fearful. Speak your office.
It alone concerns your ear. I bring no overture of war, no taxation of homage. I hold the olive in my hand. My words are as fun of peace as matter.
Yet you began rudely. What are you? What would you?
The rudeness that hath appeared in me have I learned from my entertainment. What I am and what I would are as secret as maidenhead. To your ears, divinity, to any others, profanation.
Give us the place alone. We will hear this divinity.
Maria exits.
Now, sir, what is your text?
Most sweet lady.
A comfortable doctrine, and much may be said of it. Where lies your text?
In Orsino's bosom.
In his bosom? In what chapter of his bosom?
To answer by the method, in the first of his heart.
Oh, I have read it. It is heresy. Have you no more to say?
Good madam, let me see your face.
Have you any commission from your lord to negotiate with my face? You are now out of your text. But we will draw the curtain and show you the picture. Look you, sir, such a one I was this present. It's not well done?
Excellently done, if God did all.
'Tis in grain, sir, 'twill endure wind and weather.
'Tis beauty truly blent, whose red and white nature's own sweet and cunning hand laid on. Lady, you are the cruellest she alive, if you will lead these graces to the grave and leave the world no copy.
Oh, sir, I will not be so hard-hearted. I will give out divers schedules of my beauty. It shall be inventoried, and every particle and utensil labelled to my will, as item, 2 lips, indifferent, red. Item, 2 grey eyes, with lids to them. Item, 1 neck, 1 chin, and so forth. Were you sent hither to praise me?
I see you what you are. You are too proud. But if you were the devil, you are fair. My lord and master loves you. Oh, such a love could be but recompensed though you were crowned the non-pariel of beauty.
How does he love me?
With adorations, fertile tears, with groans that thunder love, with sighs of fire.
Your lord does know my mind. I cannot love him. Yet I suppose him virtuous, know him noble, of great estate, of fresh and stainless youth, in voices well divulged, free, learned and valiant, and in dimension and the shape of nature, a gracious person. But yet I cannot love him. He might have took his answer long ago.
If I did love you in my master's flame, with such a suffering, such a deadly life, in your denial I would find no sense. I would not understand it.
Why? What would you?
Make me a willow cabin at your gate, and call upon my soul within the house. Write loyal cantons of contemned love, and sing them loud, even in the dead of night. Halloo your name to the reverberate hills, and make the babbling gossip of the air cry out, Olivia. You should not rest between the elements of air and earth, but you should pity me.
You might do much. What is your parentage?
Above my fortunes, yet my state is well. I am a gentleman.
Get you to your lord. I cannot love him. Let him send no more, unless, perchance, you come to me again to tell me how he takes it. Fare you well. I thank you for your pains. Spend this for me.
I'm no feed post, lady. Keep your purse. My master, not myself, lacks recompense. Love makes his heart of flint that you shall love, and let your fervour, like my master's, be placed in contempt. Farewell, fair cruelty.
She goes.
What is your parentage? Above my fortunes, yet my state is well. I am a gentleman. I'll be sworn thou art. Thy tongue, thy face, thy limbs, actions, and spirit do give thee 5-fold blazon. Oh, not too fast. Soft, soft. Unless the master were the man. How now? Even so quickly may one catch the plague? Methinks I feel this youth's perfections with an invisible and subtle stealth to creep in at mine eyes. Well, let it be. What ho, Malvolio?
And end of scene. Thank you very much. Okay. I don't know. Any comments on that? Well done. Beautifully read. Any comments? No?
Yes.
Yes.
This is a beautiful scene.
It's a beautiful scene. Absolutely.
It's one of my 2 favourite, well, 3 favourite wooing scenes. One of which really isn't. One from Richard III, this one, and the one from Duchess of Amalfi when she's trying to persuade Antonio.
Oh, yes.
I mean, they're just beautifully crafted.
Yeah. What did anybody notice about the language? You probably couldn't tell, but there's something that's very interesting that happens in the middle of the scene in the language. Anybody spot it? Susan? I can't. Do you want to unmute?
I think it goes from prose into verse.
Absolutely. As soon as Olivia reveals her face, Viola starts talking in verse, and so does Olivia, and it goes from prose and wit into something much more poetic. Because Viola, what's happening to Viola when she sees Olivia? The way she talks to Olivia. Can you tell? She falls in love with her. The way she talks about it, the way she's absolutely clear that if she was in love with, when she says that wonderful speech about what would you do if you were in love with me? Hello, Matt. Very good. She starts talking about how she would build a house by her and she would sing her name all the time. The point there, and that's the moment where Olivia falls in love with her, thinking she's a man. And it's only recently when I worked on this scene that I realized it was that overt, that actually it's two women falling in love with each other, not knowing that that's what they're doing. And even though Viola pulls away and pursues Orsino, at that moment when she talks about how beautiful she is, she's caught up in Olivia's beauty. And that's where Olivia falls in love with her. So it's much, much braver in terms of the complexity of the gender and the sexuality than As You Like It is. They're different plays. They're not, doesn't mean it's better, but it's going into something much subtler. And the scene after this is the scene where that Olivia gives Malvolio her ring to give to Viola. And Viola has this extraordinary thing where she's given the ring, which is usually a sign of love, and goes, I don't know what to do about this. Has she fallen in love with me? She doesn't know that I'm a woman, and gets completely confused about who she really is. It's a very famous speech. If you're doing it as an audition speech, just don't, because it's a really difficult speech. You can do it all the time.
My master loves the dearly and all that. Just
practically, it's like, please don't do this speech. Whenever I hear an actor, I'm going to do Viola's speech about the ring, inside I go, because it's like, oh, this is
that's the exact speech you taught me to do when you used to teach me.
But you did it.
I did.
Yeah, but I knew you could do it. That's the point. So anyway, and you did it beautifully. It is a wonderful speech, but it's really difficult. So
but there's also the fact that she lays into Olivia. It's like she and Festi share this thing that everybody else praises her and bigs her up, and everybody else is a yes man. Viola says, what's with you?
Get out there.
You shouldn't be doing this. You're wrong.
Yeah.
This is a bad thing, and it's like that's the thing that makes Olivia sit up and take notice.
Yeah, and also the way in which also the love poetry that Viola delivers to her is so moving, and that's the interesting. If you notice the way that Olivia talks about it, she talks about it being the plague, that the diseaseness, that falling in love is like a disease because it suddenly overwhelms you and you're not yourself. Do you see what I mean? And I think this again is a very interesting line when Malvolio famously comes on at the end in Yellow Stockings. She describes him as, this is the very Midsummer Madness, and you're going all the way back to Midsummer Night's Dream, where sexuality just makes you go completely bonkers, and that's part of the joy of it. Is that what Shakespeare's saying is that this massive power of love and sexuality is like a bomb that goes off inside you that you can't necessarily control, and it makes you into a fool. Do you know what I mean? So that was beautifully read. So the next scene we're looking at, Danny, are you there? What?
Sorry, no, I was just going. Is there not also that just the technical thing that the poetry Orsino's given her is written so overblown and so ridiculously over the top, and then she just quiet sincerity.
Well, she speaks from the heart.
Much more poetic.
She speaks directly from the heart.
Well,
I was saying to Danny that I've always had in my mind that I would love to do this play set in the Oscar Wilde era, when you have you have the kind of stern sort of Edwardian Victorian morality of a Malvolio, but that kind of lush opium you know, the world of Orsino and the dreams and the boudoir and all that kind of stuff, as well as the sort of the gender bending of it all. And I have this vision of it being with kind of drapes, that whole Oscar Wilde fin de siècle kind of quality, which I think actually would work really, really quite well for it. And I think so with this scene that we're going to look at, again, Orsino is in his room. And the trick with Orsino is that although there's a self-indulgence to him and there's a narcissism to his kind of, oh, I love Olivia, there's also a real feeling there as well. There's a depth to him, which is what Viola falls in love with, the romantic in him, the sensitive man, the man who carries his own sorrow and is a poet. She finds that very attractive. This scene, again, she's disguised as a man, so he has no idea that she is a woman. But somehow he's created a bond with her. Cesario is now his chosen male companion, a younger again. So in this scene, Danny is playing Orsino and Kayleigh is playing Viola. Off you go.
Once more, Cesario, get thee to yon same sovereign cruelty. Tell her, my love, more noble than the world, prizes not quantity of dirty lands. The parts that fortune hath bestowed upon her, tell her I hold as giddily as fortune. But 'tis that miracle and queen of gems that nature pranks her in attracts my soul.
But if she cannot love you, sir?
I cannot be so answered.
Sooth, but you must. Say that some lady, as perhaps there is, for your love a greater pang of heart, as you have for Olivia, you cannot love her. You tell her so. Must she not then be answered?
There is no woman's sides can bide the beating of so strong a passion as love doth give my heart. No woman's, excuse me, I've lost my place. No woman's heart so big to hold so much. They lack retention. Alas, their love may be called appetite, no motion of the liver, but the palate that suffered surfeit, cloyment and revolt. But mine is all as hungry as the sea and can digest as much. Make no compare between that love a woman can bear me and that I owe Olivia.
Aye, but I know.
What dost thou know?
Too well what love women to men may owe. In faith they are as true of heart as we. My father had a daughter loved a man, as it might be perhaps were I a woman, or I should your lordship.
And what's her history?
A blank, my lord. She never told her love, but let concealment, like a worm in the bud, feed on her damask cheek. She pined in thought, and with a green and yellow melancholy, she sat like Patience on a monument, smiling at grief. Was not this love indeed? We men may say more, swear more, but indeed our shows are more than will, for still we prove much in our vows, but little in our love.
But died thy sister of her love, my boy?
I'm all the daughters of my father's house, and all the brothers too, and yet I know not. Sir, shall I to this lady?
Aye, that's the theme. To her in haste, give her this jewel. Say my love can give no place, bide no delay.
Thank you. Beautiful. Lovely. Okay. Comments on that one. Thank you. What did that strike you? Did you see the difference there between that scene and the other scenes that we're looking at? No? Anyone?
I love Orsino's character. I played him once, and I played him as a complete bellend, and that's exactly what he sounded like in some of those speeches.
There you go. There's only one way to play it. There you go, Danny. Your bellendery was excellent.
Well,
But,
he thinks he's like the only person that's ever been in love in the world ever.
Yeah. But then all sorts of people do think that way, particularly when they're younger. Do you know what I mean? That's one of the things that's lovely about it is that as you grow older, you realise that people younger than you are going through all the same shit that you did when you were younger, and making the same mistakes. But I think what's beautiful about the scene though is that within all that, as you say, that arrogance and the sort of no woman can love me like I am, he's not expecting Olivia to turn around and say I love you. That would scare him, because it would all suddenly become real. It's like Keats. What songs I can't remember which songs Unheard. I can't remember what the famous line is that the fantasy of being in love is more exciting than the reality of being in love, because the reality of being in love is imperfect. Do you see what I mean? Did you notice also, though, how Viola does all she can to get close to telling him the truth about who she is?
Yeah.
And nearly does it, but can't.
She goes, yeah, but I know. And he goes, what do you know?
Yes, but also another interesting thing is that when she talks, this goes back to the thing of identity. When he says, what is her history? And she says, a blank, my lord. That's the danger, is that Viola will never express her love and never know who she really is. She will never be Cesario fully, because that's not who she is. But as long as she's Cesario, she'll never be Viola. She doesn't know a way out of where she is. And the danger is that these two, as she describes herself as, I can't remember the statue, mourning, everybody will die unfulfilled in the play if they don't speak out. If Viola never tells Orsino that she truly loves him, he will never know. If Orsino never comes out of his home to talk to Olivia, if Olivia never comes out, these three extraordinary people are living they're living unfulfilled lives. Do you see what I mean? So it's very different to Rosalind, who goes out and gets what she wants. Twelfth Night is much more melancholy, much more about gentleness and fear and anxiety and repression. And all the while Orsino and Olivia are kind of not coming out of their homes, everything's running riot with Toby Belch and all these other characters. And again, at the end of the play, it's all miraculously resolved by Sebastian turning up, who fortunately Olivia falls in love with, thinking that he's Cesario. So Shakespeare goes, well, I can't get us out of this, but I am going to bring in a twin. Unfortunately, Olivia's going to fall in love with that, so everyone's fine. No one needs to worry about being bisexual. Orsino, turns out that Orsino's in love with a woman, and it turns out that Olivia's in love with a man. We're all happy. Do you know what I mean? But underneath it all is an awareness that none of that is as clear. It's like a sea. The play is like a sea. There's ambiguity flowing all the way through it. And you've got Malvolio, who isn't part of the happy ending, who has been made a fool of, that as soon as he comes out of his sexuality, becomes an idiot, and is humiliated and horribly treated. And in there so you're left with Feste singing the song about the rain that raineth every day. So even with a comedy of that, the last images of rain falling, it's a wonderful song. That when my father died, we had a celebration for him, and Derek Griffiths sang that song, and he made it the most haunting and beautiful thing you've ever heard. And one of the things that's beautiful about the song is that although it's a comedy song, it goes all the way back to when the world began. There's a kind of mysticism to it about how all these different things. And the songs, again, present mirth has present laughter. There's a sadness to Twelfth Night and an enchantment to it, which is really special. It's not an easy play to get right, but I think that it's that intimacy and that awareness of the game of men and women that make it kind of remarkable. So we're nearly finished. Anything I want to say? Anything more about Twelfth Night? No. Any questions? No. Well, so the fourth play is Much Ado About Nothing. Now, the reason I've included this is I love Much Ado About Nothing. It was the first Shakespeare I ever did. Much Ado About Nothing, there is no gender bending. There's no women wearing trousers. It's a very clear society where men and women are demarked. The men are very masculine, they're soldiers, and the women, it's almost like, if anything, it's like, to me, it's always been like a Jane Austen play, in that the men have a very clear role and the women have their particular worlds, and it's very clearly demarked. And I don't think I've ever seen the play. It doesn't really work if you take it out of a kind of a setting in which a sort of Napoleonic setting. Do you know what I mean? The kind of 19th century setting, or something before then. If you take it out of that, it's also an area where war is still romantic. So it's very much a pre-First World War drama. I remember someone I knew wanted to propose to do it. It's set during the First World War, after the First World War, with the women as suffragettes, and you were kind of going, I'm not sure it's quite what the play is. And also the horror of the First World War would mean that making jokes about it is quite tricky. It needs that romanticism, the visual romanticism, and if you look at it, it's a play in which everything is strictly ruled. Wooing is done on behalf of each other. parents choose who their children are going to marry. The women stay together, the men stay together, and it's all very carefully demarked. But even so, within the play, you've still got disguise. There's the masked ball where everyone is wearing masks and people get the wrong end of the stick. There's the very ending where Hero and Beatrice and I think it's Margaret come on with veils again, and Claudio has to decide which one he's going to marry. And lo and behold, it's Hero. And there's also a mystery death. There's the whole faked death of Hero, which is the way in which they resolve the whole thing. So the point there is that even within a society where everything seems to be very demarked and clear, there's an element of disguise. And how, in a society where everybody's overhearing each other and listening to each other and making fun of each other if they look like they're in love, how do you hide your feelings? And how do you find the person that you want? And what's one of the most interesting things about Much Ado About Nothing is the two most famous characters, Benedict and Beatrix, aren't lead. They're not the main parts. The main parts are actually Hero and Claudio. They're the ones who are the main story, but they're not as vividly written as Beatrice and Benedict. And everybody loves Beatrice and Benedict, the verbal wit, sexuality, the sexiness of it all. But the point about the play is that when I did it, when people said, oh, well, the problem with the play is that Hero and... Whenever someone tells me that something's wrong with a Shakespeare play, I decide I'm going to put it right. So when I was told Hero and Claudio aren't interesting, I thought, oh, right, okay, we're going to make them interesting. And as soon as you really invest in their story, which is really about male insecurity, it's also about the fact that if you do keep men and women apart, they're not going to understand each other. And it's also about jealousy and revenge, but also Claudio, if you look at him, has got some serious issues. There's a lot of anger in him. If you get it right, the whole journey of the play is once again about the two lovers properly understanding themselves and each other. So you hope that when they actually come together, it'll be all right. You also have the fascinating Don John character, who, when I first did it, I thought that's the character I identify with, the one who refuses to take part in what he thinks of as a superficial, false, hypocritical society. Or was it, I'd rather be a canker in a hedge than a bird in a cage, I think is what he says. Where everybody else is being witty and funny, he goes, no, I don't believe in this. Underneath all this it's wrong, I'm going to destroy it. And that's again where Shakespeare does his wonderful thing of bringing in a dark character into the middle of a comedy. Now, the free song of Beatrice and Benedict is there's lots of mysteries around them. It's hinted in the play that they'd had a relationship before that went wrong, and they both insist that they're not interested in each other. They're not in love with each other. They don't fancy each other, and in fact, they're not interested in being with someone anyway. But whenever they talk, they fence, and it's almost as if what Shakespeare's done is he's gone back to Taming of the Shrew, and instead of making it with one of them winning, the man winning, they're a match for each other. They're also obviously an echo of Barone and Rosalind in Love's Labour's Lost. So the point there is that Beatrice defends her patch. She defends her own autonomy with her own verbal wit. And she gives Benedict, and the reason why they're attracted to each other is because they're both as clever and as sharp as each other. They're both misfits. And they both know, they spark. They're like two Noel Coward characters, Private Lives, Randa and Elliot. Fizzing with each other all the time. So the scene we're going to look at is the scene after the aborted wedding, where Don John has made Claudio believe that Hero has betrayed him and gone off with someone else. So Claudio accuses her in the wedding of being unfaithful. She faints, and then Claudio and his lot disappear. And Hero, but Benedict, who's part of Claudio's posse, doesn't go with him. He stays because he's horrified by what's going on. And at the end of the scene, with the whole plot of keeping Hero's death secret, the fact that she's not dead secret, Beatrice and Benedict are left alone on the stage. And it's a wonderful scene where it's a much more, rather than the subtlety and the verbal humour of Olivia and Viola and Rosalind, it's much more a sparky, vibrant scene. So in this scene, we want you to imagine that Beatrice has probably got her back to Benedict at the beginning. She's probably overcome with emotion and feeling a bit probably sobbing. So Benedict, left alone with her, and the other thing to be aware of is that they've both been tricked into believing that the other one loves them. So they both respond to that by going, fantastic. when is the other one going to say something? So in this scene, Benedict and Beatrice are left alone, and the two things that are occupying them is the trauma of what's happened and also the fact that they both think they're the ones in love with them. Okay, off you go.
Lady Beatrice, have you wept all this while?
Yea, and I will weep a while longer.
I will not desire that.
You have no reason. I do it freely.
Surely I do believe your fair cousin is wronged.
Ah, how much might the man deserve of me that would right her?
Is there any way to show such friendship?
A very even way, but no such friend.
May a man do it?
It is a man's office, but not yours.
I do love nothing in the world so well as you. Is not that strange?
As strange as the thing I know not. It were as possible for me to say I love nothing so well as you, but believe me not, and yet I lie not. I confess nothing, nor I deny nothing. I am sorry for my cousin.
By my sword, Beatrice, thou lovest me.
Do not swear it and eat it.
I will swear by it that you love me, and I will make him eat it that says I love not you.
Will you not eat your word?
With no source that can be devised to it, I protest I love thee.
Why then, God forgive me.
What offence, sweet Beatrice?
You have stayed with me in a happy hour. I was about to protest I loved you.
And do it with all thy heart.
I love you so much. I love you with so much of my heart that none is left to protest.
Come, bid me do anything for thee.
Kill Claudio.
Not for the wide world.
You kill me to deny it. Farewell.
Tarry, sweet Beatrice.
I am gone, though I am here. There is no love in you. Nay, I pray you let me go.
Beatrice.
In faith, I will go.
We'll be friends first.
You dare easier be friends with me than fight with mine enemy.
Is Claudio thine enemy?
Is he not approved in the height of a villain that hath slandered, scorned, dishonoured my kinswoman? Oh, that I were a man, what bear her in hand until they come to take hands, and then with public accusation, uncovered slander, unmitigated rancour. Oh, God, that I were a man, I would eat his heart in the marketplace.
Hear me, Beatrice.
Talk with a man out at a window, a proper saying.
Nay, but Beatrice.
Sweet hero, she is wronged, she is slandered, she is undone.
Beatrice.
Princes and counties, surely a princely testimony, a goodly count, Count Comfort, a sweet gallant, surely. Oh, that I were a man for his sake, or that I had any friend would be a man for my sake. But manhood is melted into courtesies, valour into compliment, and men are only turned into tongue and trim ones too. He is now as valiant as Hercules that only tells a lie and swears it. I cannot be a man with wishing, therefore I will die a woman with grieving.
Tarry, good Beatrice. By this hand I love thee.
Use it for my love some other way than swearing by it.
Think you in your soul the Count Claudio hath wronged Hero?
Yea, as sure as I have a thought or a soul.
Enough. I am engaged. I will challenge him. I will kiss your hand, and so I leave you. By this hand, Claudio shall render me a dear account. As you hear of me, so think of me. Go comfort your cousin. I must say she is dead. And so, farewell.
Good. Well done. Nice. Okay. What I love about Much Ado About Nothing, although I like the subtlety of all the other ones, I love the directness of Much Ado About Nothing and the kind of spark between them. And you can see any comments on why that scene is different in tone, the way that they relate to each other, to the other plays. Anyone? No? Well,
they're much more direct with each other.
Yeah, exactly. They're much, because they're not disguised, because they're not hiding who they really are. Although what's hilarious in it is that the way they bumble into admitting that they love the other one. Again, it's the same embarrassment about how you really feel. And also you've got something I haven't brought up is if you listen to all the different extracts, there's lots of comments about men and women women behave like this, men behave like that, men behave like this. In Shakespeare's time, just as much now, there was endless philosophizing and banging on about women's nature is like this, men's nature is like that. There was feminism in those days, not as articulate necessarily as ours, but it actually always existed. And actually one of the things Shakespeare's always doing is making fun of all those categories, in the same way that Orsino was sitting there going, women can't love like us men, and Viola's going, well, actually they love just like us. How do you know? Well, because I am a woman. Oh no, sorry, did I say that? That kind of thing. It's all there, all that kind of what is a man, what is a woman. And also the difficulty being that if you've got all these prejudices about how men and women behave, how on earth are you going to deal with the individual that you're in love with in front of you? Do you see what I mean? Because while all the stereotypes are in one sense true, the individual that you're in love with is not a stereotype. Does that make sense? And I think, again, it's about how people bumble into love, how they get confused into love. And the beauty of that scene is that Benedick is the soldier, but it's his main thing in the scene is he wants to comfort Beatrice. But Beatrice is not the soldier, but she wants him to go and kill his cousin. And what's interesting in the play is that, and this is where the comedy has to come in, is Benedick's rather cack-handed attempt to kill Claudio, where the next scene is this massive chaotic scene where everyone runs around and shouts at each other, and then somehow it all gets worked out. But the interesting thing with it is that Benedick changes sides. Having been on the side of Claudio and Leonato, he switches sides and goes on the side of Beatrice and Hero. It's a fabulous play to explore in that way. But it only really works if you have got that period sense of honor and the soldier and all that kind of stuff, and the idea that you might send your man off to do your heroic execution or whatever you want, not execution, you challenge someone to a duel. So the last scene, I'm just going to look at the very last scene, because what's lovely about it is that even though all this happens and they profess their love to each other, she tries to scurry away from it. And the last scene where the trick is that they believe that Claudio is genuinely repentant. So they give him a chance. And they say, well, to make up for what you've done, you're going to have to marry someone, but we're not going to tell you who it is. So he says, yeah, that's fine, I'll do that. And they give him a choice of 3 women, as we said earlier, and he miraculously chooses Hero, who is resurrected, and they're reunited, and he admits that he was wrong. So it all looks like it's going to be fabulous, and everyone's about to go off and have a party. But Benedick has got some unfinished business, because everyone else is getting married. But didn't Beatrice say that she loved him? Off you go.
Soft and fair, friar, which is Beatrice?
I answer to that name. What is your will?
Do not you love me?
Why, no more than reason.
Why then, your uncle and the prince and Claudio have been deceived. They swore you did.
Do you not love me?
Troth, no more than reason.
Why, then my cousin Margaret and Ursula are much deceived, for they did swear you did.
They swore that you were almost sick for me.
They swore that you were well nigh dead for me.
'Tis no such matter. Then you do not love me?
No, truly, but in friendly recompense.
Come, cousin, I'm sure you love the gentleman. I'm just going to read these.
Oh, sorry, is it me? Sorry, I missed it. Go on.
Yeah. And I'll be sworn upon that he loves her, for here's a paper written by his hand, a halting sonnet of his own pure brain, fashioned to Beatrice. And here's another writ in my cousin's hand, stolen from her pocket, containing her affection unto Benedick.
A miracle! Here's our own hands against our hearts. Come, I will have thee, but by this light I take thee for pity.
I would not deny you, but by this good day I yield upon great persuasion, and partly to save your life, for I was told you were in a consumption.
Peace. I will stop your mouth.
And he kisses her. Thank you. So you can see that it's a lovely, lovely ending to the Much Ado About Nothing, where right up to the end they're resisting falling in love with each other, and it's the classic thing of almost at school where you say, my mate fancies you, or X loves you. No, I don't. No, I don't. I fancy anybody. All that kind of stuff. But it's adults. So there's a lot of humour there. And again, it's wit. It's verbal wit. They're fencing with each other. So Shakespeare deliberately makes it about soldiers, so that the wit is about sword fights. And that's the other beautiful thing about those plays. And I found this out when you really, really immerse it. You realise that in every single play, he creates, and this is actually a big note in general, every Shakespeare play, he creates a completely integrated and autonomous world, which is different to the worlds of all the others. And the characters talk in a different way. If you look at how they talk in Othello, they talk differently to how they do in Macbeth, differently to how they do in King Lear. And the brilliance of deciding that for the one play where he's going to make it about unambiguously heterosexual people, where the genders are completely traditional, he turns it into a sword fight. He uses the metaphor of the sword fight as the way that men and women will fence. And if you look at it, the way that the women in Viola and Rosalind, they become men so that they can explore and find out about the men that they're in love with. They don't have to defend themselves, whereas when they're women, they do have to defend themselves. They have to fight their corner and create their autonomy within everything. But the beauty of it all is, and this I suppose is where is that ultimately in all of these plays, not only love makes everyone go crazy, they all behave in a bonkers way, but it does win out at the end. And the other thing about love is it breaks down all the categories. So all these prejudices about men and women, they're broken down to the point where however autonomous, we talk about characters being autonomous, when you're in love, you're not autonomous. And when you're married, your autonomy is completely compromised, or you're in love with someone. And that's the struggle of it all. But the beauty of the play is getting in there with all these different plays. So we're going to end with the final speech from Midsummer Night's Dream, which is where we started. And this is the invocation at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream, where Oberon and Titania are reconciled and they bless the house. And this is the interesting thing about this speech, is it's not iambic pentameter, and no one ever gets this right. Whenever I've seen Midsummer Night's Dream, they don't realise this is what the scene is about. The whole point is that on Midsummer Night, the god and the goddess bless the marriage. They bless men and women, and for a moment in that year there is harmony between men and women, and there is this wonderful blessing for the issue of that. And here is the speech.
Now until the break of day, through this house each fairy stray. To the best bride bed will we, which by us shall blessed be, and the issue there create ever shall be fortunate. So shall all the couples three ever true in loving be, and the blots of nature's hand shall not in their issue stand. Never mole, hair, lip, nor scar, nor mark prodigious, such as are despised in nativity, shall upon their children be. With this field due consecrate, every fairy take his gate, and each several chamber bless, through this palace with sweet peace. And the owner of it, blessed, ever shall in safety rest. Trip away, make no stay, meet me all by break of day.
Thank you, Robin. It's lovely. So there you go. That's the blessing of Shakespearean comedy, is that ultimately love will win out, marriage will succeed, and healing will happen. Everything will be transformed into something divine and beautiful. And I actually think it was interesting. Last year I did a couple of workshops on comedy and tragedy at Durham University, and I was really surprised at how actually I was more excited by the comedies than the tragedies. And in a funny kind of way at the moment, particularly going through what we're going through at the moment, I feel there's a real place for Shakespearean comedy to really unlock that transformative, enchanting, love-filled world for us all, which is full of magic. So that's all I want to say tonight. I hope that's okay. Managed to get it in on a neat 2 hours. Is there anything anybody wants to ask before we all go?
Only to say thank you. That was terrific.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to say a big thank you to our actors, Joe Williams, Kayleigh Hawkins and Robin Kingsland. So next week, join us for some tragedy, some misery and storm and drought.
Looking
In which
forward
case,
to
I
it.
have to say all the same fucking things except to do with tragedy. But thank you very much, everybody. It's a real pleasure. And see you next week.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.